come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going?
Hello, and welcome to JUUst Breathe, a podcast for those involved in the world of Unitarian Universalist religious education, and for anyone who likes to talk about Unitarian Universalism. I am Ember Oak Kelly. I use any pronouns, and I am the host of JUUst Breathe for this season. I am a white, gender-expansive person. I am wearing glasses as well as a red sweatshirt, and behind me is very plain walls, and you can see a purple chair to the side of me as well. Purple is my favorite color if anybody wants some expanded show lore. And this season on JUUst Breathe, we are focusing on the community building map of deeper joy as well as whole church religious education. And in this episode, I am so excited to be joined by Jenn Blosser and Michael Molina to explore how covenant shapes Unitarian Universalist communities. So, my amazing guests, could you tell us a bit about who you are, your pronouns, and that visual description, as well as your relationship with Unitarian Universalism?
Hi, so I'm Jenn Blosser. My pronouns are she, her. I've been a religious educator for about a decade in UU congregations, and I am now in a phase where I am like a wild UU freelance religious educator, workshops and fun stuff like that. I'm a white woman with long, dirty blonde hair, and I am sitting in front of a rainbowy color wall with lots of UU adjacent art upon it.
My name is Michael Molina. I use any pronouns. I'm a brown non-binary person with poorly bleached hair and glasses. And I am sitting in my room. And I grew up in the Pacific Southwest District and participated in the youth board there. And from there, moved into the Emerging Adult Task Force that started in Pacific West District. And then, yeah, I've been, I still consider myself a UU, but I'm very bad at attending service, which is a theme for young adults.
I was going to say, it happens to the best of us at many different ages in our lives, too. I'm outside of the young adult range by a few years now, and even I sometimes don't make it on Sundays. Don't tell anyone in the UUA, though.
We'll keep it secret.
So I've mentioned that we're using the Deeper Joy community building map this season. And so in the Deeper Joy community building map, Covenant is represented by the Covenant Lighthouse, which I think provides a really great image for how covenants can help in the community building. That they can give some guidance, some shining. I'm doing some fun hand motions for those listening. And we can have them to help us navigate the complexities that come with community, just as they help sailors navigate out when there's storms on the ocean. And additionally, covenant is discussed a lot in UU communities because we like to think of ourselves as grounded in covenants and not in creeds, or in agreements of how we exist instead of by what we believe. And so I thought that starting here for our journey through this community building map would be the best place to start. And so to get to know our guest a little bit better, I'd like to start with a more personal question for you. When you think about covenant in your own life, whether that's personal, whether that's in the work that you've done and some sort of ministry you've been involved with, what is a moment where you felt like covenant was really a guiding light or a lighthouse for you?
I have an example that's not necessarily UU, but is a way that I live covenant in my daily life. I've been working in education for the past 4 or 5 years. And I'm currently in a master's program getting my teaching credential. But for me, covenant looks like something like classroom agreements or norms that we might set together. And definitely my experience through Unitarian Universalism has really shaped what that looks like. Practices that we would engage in as youth, building covenants in our youth groups, are ones that I've brought into the classroom now. And so definitely I see covenant as a guiding light in how I am in the classroom and how I expect students to be and the relationships that we build there.
Yeah, so I have a very recent one. It's happening right now. My example would be that at the start of the summer, we became a multi-generational household. So my stepdaughter turns 25 later this month, and her husband and my granddaughter, who has just turned 4, have all moved in with us, which is such a blessing. But now we have 2 families with different parenting expectations because my younger 2 are 13 and 9, so they're still with us, right? So we have different parenting expectations. We're at different stages of our parenting. We've got 2 independent families living under one roof, and we get along so well. We're super, super close. We are a family. You always say about that friend group, like we're like a family, like we literally are. And you better believe that right now up in the kitchen, there's a big piece of paper with our drafted covenant for how we're going to live in this house together. Because, and I think this is the piece that I love so much about the way we use covenant in our, UU community spaces. It's such a beautiful way to honor, yes, we do love each other so much that we are going to prepare for when we find our growing edges or when we inevitably come into conflict because we're human beings. And putting that care at the forefront is just so magic to me. So that's, where covenant is happening right now in my life.
No, I love that both of your examples came from outside of congregational settings, because like that's been one of the things that in my experience when I was still in a congregation, that I'd be conversing with the youth and with the younger kids, and they'd be like, yeah, like we do this at this place and I do this at home. And in fact, like when I moved to Michigan last year and was like talking with my kids about expectations, we actually wrote it as a family covenant that lives on the fridge, that then also has like a little like how are we feeling check in on the side of it as well. And one of the inside jokes here at the Lifespan Faith Engagement team is anytime that someone says the word boundaries, everyone's like, Ember loves boundaries in the chat. And I've gained a bit of a reputation, but when I think of covenant, I think of having those boundaries clearly explained from the beginning, and the way that that can help you just navigate so many things so much easier if you have your very clear expectations of things. So I love that. Another thing I love is our upcoming, soon to be released Journeys of Deeper Joy role playing game, which I've been involved in putting together. And to help us to have a little creative moment after that slightly more, serious, self-reflective question, I'd like to role play about Covenant. So, we're imagining we are some fantastical characters. There's in the story, there's Teapot, Misty, and Rock and Roll. Teapot has a teapot for head. Rock and Roll is a sentient rock, and Misty is a literal cloud of mist. So lots of you can be imaginating whoever you would like to be here. But our characters have visited the Covenant Lighthouse, and we've been given the map of Covenant, bum bum bum, which leads us towards the treasure of community. And the map notes that along this route we will face many challenges. So how could you envision this mysterious map of covenant guiding us through a challenge of some sort? You can be as creative or as serious as you'd like. All is welcome.
I know you have cliffs on the Deeper Joy map, but I'm seeing growing edges as cliffs, right? So this idea that there are these cliffs that are not necessarily maybe dangerous, but if you don't know where the footing is, you could slip, you could fall, there could be injury along the way, right? So this covenant helps us by providing us some knowledge about where that surer footing is going to be, right? We're not necessarily seeing the whole clear path down those cliffs of growing edges, and we know because of these boundaries outlined in the covenant that, so this is probably the next good move, or, ooh, this is how we should approach this next cliff. Yeah.
I think my my scenario is pretty similar because I was thinking of to use Ember's words from earlier, the interpersonal monster, the monster of interpersonal conflict. And when we run into that, I think a tool that has been very helpful in covenants, that I've seen, I kind of went more literal with this, I think, is like owning your impact. I think that's like a very big challenge. And I especially like it because I remember having conversations where we wanted to kind of take it away from assume good intentions and translate the language into more ownership of the original statement or the original action that caused harm.
I'm writing this down. I love that phrasing.
Yeah. So that's been super, definitely in past experiences I've had with Covenant, that's been something that's been super important. It's just, yeah, take that moment to own up, right? Like, shoot, like that's not what I meant, but that affected you this way, and that means a lot to me. Like, I need to improve the situation.
Wow. I love both of these. So, I'm definitely not going to write an extra couple of lessons based just off of these. That's for a future edition.
The expansion pack.
Yeah, the JUUst Breathe themed expansion pack. I think, I think we can go with it. But I really love both of those, thinking about both how it gives us that sure footing when there's maybe an edge we might not know about, and in dealing with an interpersonal conflict, how we might have had a role in that. I know one of the things that makes me think a lot about covenant was 2 years ago, the common read, the on repentance and repair. And I know that when I read that, one of my own big takeaways was to really lean into what was my impact in this situation, like in processing repair, owning what role I had in the situation. And yeah, I think that both of those are just such beautiful things for thinking about how covenant can give us a little bit of light, a little bit of a map to building that deeper community. Okay, to turn us away from the role playing, as much as I would like to have the entire podcast just be a fun role playing session.
Another time.
I've got some dice. I've got some dice at the ready, and but we'll hold off. But I would like to ask, just a few more questions about bigger covenant concepts to get us kind of discussing. And so I've already mentioned a little bit about how UUs are very much, we are covenant over creed. This is, something that a lot of people say, and what makes a difference for UUs. So I'd be curious, what is your take on how covenant makes a difference in how we live together in community? Like how do you see that as maybe different from other approaches? How do you see that, beneficial? Really any direction that your heart calls you to take that one. What difference does it make in how we live together in community, to be living by covenant instead of like by creed or by other measures?
Something that really has stuck with me since my RE days. I had a religious educator in San Diego who said our 7 principles, right? It's not necessarily a creed or like a dogma, but it's a challenge, right? It's not that we mean anything less if we're not meeting all of those principles, but like that is our goal that we're striving for. And that to me is like always been like the spirit of Unitarian Universalism, is we're always working towards a better world and working towards justice.
To me, then, like, living in covenant is practicing that. It's practicing challenging ourselves to live by our principles, by challenging us to live by the norms that we've created together.
I think this idea of challenge is really important when we think about how covenant impacts us in our faithful spaces and our lives. I think we're all familiar with the trope that like, oh, come be you, you can believe whatever you want, right? And how that's like, no, that's not how this works. And I think what's amazing about the challenge of covenant is that it's the tool whereby we can include everyone without excluding anyone, right? It's this piece that kind of allows us, and again, it's a challenge. It is not easy. There's nothing about that that is that comes almost naturally, I would almost say, at least in our American culture, I'm speaking from very specifically here. So I think it is really countercultural to live in deeply intentional covenant community the way that we dream of as you use. And I think that there's such power in being able to do it. And I think it's very hard to do it well if we're not committed to making an overt practice of it, right?
I don't know all of my old UU jokes quite by heart, but you know, the we believe in no more gods than one. And I was like, wait, I am in fact a polytheist and a UU. And you know, that's actually one of the things that I've kind of I think I've mentioned it before in past podcasts, and that I like to lean into thinking about with something like covenant is how can yes, we all believe different things, but I think our tendency, both as West in America in particular, is like the out of many one, and that's the Unitarianism, like that. Oh, well, it's all just the same God in the end. And it's like, what if we do just all have different beliefs and we can just have different things and it's all okay that we're different? And I think that covenant can really be that thing that lets us say, yeah, that's okay. Like we still have our understanding of how we want to function and be together while holding these different beliefs without saying, oh, well, it's okay. We're all just the same in the end. Like, let's in fact use covenant to celebrate difference. I think that's one of the things that really inspires me about covenant.
Pluralism, which is like my new most favoriteest word. It's funny, when we were first transitioning, to using the values, pluralism was the one where I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like I haven't really thought about this piece. Equity is very easy. That's an easy one to teach. Because of course, as a religious educator, that's most of how I interacted with this change, right? Okay, how do I bring this into a classroom? How do we teach this? And pluralism was the one I had the most fun with, because it is that idea, and it's and naming it as a value gives it an extra oomph to expand that thought of like, instead of from many one, what if it's just many? Right? Pretty cool.
I think there's been multiple mentions of religious education already in this time. And I think that religious educators, in my experience, as someone who came to Unitarian Universalism in the last, it's been 5 years now. But from other backgrounds, one of the things that I've really appreciated is that religious educators are often doing this work of covenant with the young people, and that I love that that's now like a language that my kids speak about thinking about and understanding the world, is like, oh, like what do we agree on together? Like they understood when I said I wanted to do a family covenant, and that was because at the beginning of every year when I was in the field as a religious educator, I was saying, okay, start of the year, we're going to set our expectations together as a group, and we're going to read them every week as best as we remember to. And so I think that religious educators and like our youth spaces have done such good work modeling, what covenant can be, and really helping push, which kind of brings me into my next consideration. One of our other big themes for this year is whole church religious education. This idea that RE doesn't need to be, religious education doesn't need to be something separate. We don't need to silo off our young people. And instead, there's lots of wisdom that can be shared between those who are working in religious education and the more general community of the congregation. There's no need for all of these strict divides, but lots more both and so I'm curious how a whole church approach can really help us live into covenant more across generations. Like how can we do better in I think it's really easy for us to see covenant with friends, with family, and even with people of similar like brackets of us, but it is often harder to be like, okay, like how am I in covenant with the older members of a congregation? How am I in covenant with the younger members of a congregation? And thinking about those dynamics. So I'd love to hear any thoughts you have about how this whole church approach and how just religious education in general could really help live in a covenant across generations.
So I recently, I'm going to tell a story. Whether or not this sparks anything for you, Michael, I don't know. Let's see. I recently inherited my grandmother's tea set, and this is a big deal. This is proper. If you didn't know, I grew up in the UK, and it was so special when this all came back home because it's proper, little bone china tea set, all the little gold rims, and oh my God, so dainty, can't even put a finger through the handle. And the reason it came to me is because I used it all the time. Like when we were little kids, we were using Nanny's fine bone china tea set for tea. And I hadn't thought of this story of a friend of mine for years. I had a friend in college, and she had inherited a dinner service. I couldn't tell you now what was so special or fancy or whatever about it. It must have come from, a really good make. I don't know, it's a Meissen dinner service or something. I don't know. But, she'd inherited this, and she was working as an actress, and she was about to move to New York City to do the whole, you know, actress thing there, and sort of live in a tiny, tiny apartment with a few friends and travel a whole bunch doing summer stock. And so while she had inherited this from her grandparents, well, from her grandmother, she was like, there's no way I can move around with this. So, and it can't go in the dishwasher and it doesn't easily pack, yada, yada, yada. So she sold it. And she used the money from the sale, which was a decent amount, not that I remember, but she used the money to like buy a whole new set of suitcases or, something really practical that would help her life that she knew her grandmother would approve of. So it's honoring that legacy. But her family, when they found out she had sold it, was livid and crushed because it turns out that was what was remaining. Her grandfather had gone back to Germany and dug it up. That, when her family had fled Germany, they had buried it. And she was devastated. She felt so awful about it. And she was so angry because she had no idea that was the story, this, dinner service set had this legacy and had this connection and had this meaning and carried such important value. And it's funny because as I was sitting there getting my tea set, I remembered that story from college and thought, oh my gosh, this is part of the work of whole church religious education. When we let the kids use the fine china, they understand why it's important. When we involve all ages in the story, in the touching, in the having, in the ritual of this thing, there's a deeper connection to it. And I think that it's not, and it doesn't just go one way. It's not just for, making sure that the kids don't sell off the china, right? But I think it enriches our elders as well. Nanny spent hours making tea and sitting around a little tea table. I was allowed to bring my dolls or my bears, and we had her beautiful fine china with my toys. And that was obviously enriching and special for her as well. That was ritual for her as well, right? So I've been, having just recently inherited this, I've been really sitting with this idea of, wow, there, I think if you've been in a UU congregation, you know the folks in many of our congregations who like took part in building the building, right? I mean, the most recent congregation I served, tons of like half the congregation there can remember laying the foundation for that building. And there's a wealth of story and love and humanity and treasure and covenant that has been built there. And if we keep everyone's faith formation experience very separate based on age and role, then those stories don't always get shared or appreciated or understood in ways that actually can form our faith.
That story helped me gather some thoughts. Thank you, Jen. Because I was thinking then about the people that were older than me that I had impactful relationships with in my original congregation, and it did make me realize or help me realize that like Unitarian Universalism is about action. Like half of it is the challenge of living by our values, and the other half is the action of living our values, of doing the stuff. And like thinking about times when maybe it was like a protest that our RE leaders took us to, or maybe it was GA or General Assembly that we were taken to, like participating in those events with the not only the adult RE leaders, but also like other adults from our congregations, through like any kind of event, like you're saying, the building of the buildings, or just the maintenance of the facilities. Or we would have events at First UU in San Diego where unhoused people would come and get meals and like be able to sleep in the church for a period of time. And like working with my family to make that meal, and like we played Monopoly, I remember, and just like thinking about like, wow, we're just spending time together, living our values of like the inherent worth of every person and the interconnectedness of us. And those were the moments that definitely felt the most impactful.
When we think of religious education, we think of young people, and I think even in my own notes in preparation for this, like centering youth and emerging adults. But I know that one of the big benefits for me in engaging in multi-generational community is that it's helped me to learn to appreciate elders too. And like Michael, you were just talking about going to a protest, and it made me think about like the older activists that I've met, have been at this grind since the 80s or before, that I meet and talk to, and I'm like, whoa, you were out protesting during Reagan and I wasn't even born yet. And so somehow I've now found myself 15 years into some level of activism, and suddenly I'm like, wait, when did I become a person with experience? And it's it's that continuity, and that I don't believe I'm often, I've joked with people that I'm like the most radical traditionalist, that I'm like, I love tradition and I love learning why people did things and understanding like how that was shaped and where things come from, and I like trying things new and like shaking it up and seeing how things could be different. So how can we hold both of those parts? And I think part of that is in covenant, and part of that is in building this intergenerational, multi-generational, whole church type of community where we can value both pass on the insights from the elders of the community to our young people, because I think, especially, I grew up evangelical in the 2000s, and youth culture was very separate from the rest of the congregation. And from what I gather, that it was largely the same thing in the UU world, that cons kind of became a whole separate thing than like even congregations, and that youth kind of had their own spaces. And like I think it is really important for us to have that. But if we get disconnected from congregations, then we're losing that touch, and then we're going to be so disappointed when we don't understand why things are changing above or below us in our age range, and we don't understand. And I think a lot of that a lot of the conflict about big changes. I think Jen, I think we need to package up that little story and we can like send it out to like any congregation in conflict and just be like, is this what's going on? Did someone accidentally sell the set, not realizing how important it was to so many others? Because I think that's really spot on for when we aren't passing on that wisdom between each other, if that isn't constantly being like interchanged, like, oh, the youth have something to teach the older folks. When I was working in a congregation, what I did for Time for All Ages is I took a question based off of the sermon's theme and asked it to our young people. And the Time for All Ages was largely them sharing. And it took some cultivation and some work to get to that point with the youth and our young people. But by the end of it, people loved the concept because they were coming to realize the immense wisdom that our young people also held. And like it's so important to to find a way to do that isn't harmful, that's life-giving and healthy. Because I think one of my worries with sometimes with covenant is that people can use it as kind of like a don't do the thing I don't like, don't do the thing I don't like. I'm gonna hammer you down and make sure you don't do the thing I don't like. That's breaking covenant for the youth to want to change worship and do something new and interesting and different. And so I think I suppose thinking about that, are there ways that there are dangers that need to be watched out for in engaging? How can we be better in keeping covenant when we're engaging across generations and we're trying to get the wisdom of our young people shared? How can we do that in like covenantally healthy ways for our young people?
I think something that is really stands out to me is like the importance of like just being intentional with covenant, that it can't just be we sat in the circle and we said the things that we thought and we put the poster on the wall and everyone initialed it. It has to be like meaningful. I'm someone that is very into like the creation of covenants. I love getting into the wording of everything. I think that's part of it, is like what are we saying and how are we saying it, and like what will that look like in the future. It's definitely something that we talk about in the classroom. Is like, all right, we said be respectful, but what does that mean, or what does that look like? Like we can't just say, oh, we're be respectful, we'll be kind. So like being intentional about what we're saying and how we're saying it and giving examples. um and then also I think Jen mentioned this earlier, it's the revisiting it. It has to be revisited. It can't be the set it and forget it. We did the covenant, we did the thing. It's the always going back to it. And something that we've been talking about in my grad school program is the idea of praxis, of like theory, practice, and reflection. And I think that's the last part is the key, the reflection and thinking about, right, when we're looking at it, it's not just, oh, remember to do these things. It's how did last week go? Did we live up to this? Was there something that happened that wasn't part of the covenant that we need to repair now or go back and look at?
Yeah, covenants is a living, breathing part of our community building. Legit. Um, when we approach or when we look at covenant through the lens of like whole church religious education, I think anyway, I said before how covenant is kind of countercultural, and how we are really in the process of covenanting and not saying, okay, check, done, like that's on the wall now and it's fine. But keeping that in our focus, that's not a that takes effort that doesn't feel natural, I think, in Western culture, at least how I have experienced how our systems get built. And I think another piece of this countercultural element of covenanting and where we can fall into problems is where we adopt the worldviews that we are handed. So something I'm constantly undoing with youth is that, the elders don't matter, right? They're not relevant anymore. And I don't mean to make our teens sound like monsters, because they're not at all. And they live in a completely different world than many of the elders in this congregation do, right? They have a different relationship with technology. They have a different relationship with society, just like their elders had a completely different world when they were teens compared to their elders, right? And then the perspective from elders is like, that these kids, haven't earned their stripes yet, right? Like they haven't, they're heirs above their station or whatever I'm trying to say badly here. But there's a piece about covenanting where you have to believe that everyone you're covenanting with is worthy of covenanting with in a deep, deep way, right? And that means you have to go against that grain where it might feel natural or convenient, or maybe you have adopted a vision that you have not even paid attention to the fact that you've adopted, about sort of the value of the perspective of the other people in the room, right? And I think that's where that's kind of what's at the root of falling into using covenant as a cudgel. Because I know what the covenant really means, right? Because of my perspective and my identity, I have a better grip on this. So I think about that a lot, and I think about how we build those conversations, and how we try to invite those perspectives to respect each other and to seek value from each other. Because, again, back with the fine china, right? When our youth can better appreciate and understand our elders, and when our elders can better appreciate and value the youth, like that's when we see that thrive. That's when we see the china preserved. Such a strange metaphor this is turning into, but
The real takeaway is we need to wash our dishes now. No, I think both some things came into my mind. Both of like the image, that we write the mission statement, we write the covenant, and then we toss it up on the website, and then it lives there for the rest of time. But that's not a living covenant. So I think, if anything, as you use, that we need to transition into not just saying that we're, people of covenant, but we're people of living covenant, like that we're, this conversational covenant of what you're talking about, like that people are constantly interacting with it. That's so important for us. And yeah, like this really gets at which was going to be my next question, which is about like some of the challenges faced by communities that are guided by covenant. Like that we might kind of fall into just seeing it as like this really static thing. B, that we're not fully seeing the other people as actually participants in the covenant. Like these are two real things that can really mess with the power dynamics of a covenant. This isn't if we can't see the others as valuable human beings. And Jenn, kind of also diving in with what you were saying about that we bring our cultures, and with talking about youth and elders and our culture. I was having this conversation with someone just yesterday. I was like, our culture does not like young people, and also does not really like old people. Strangely, just somehow doesn't really like anybody. But that's besides the point. Our culture is being grumpy, apparently. But so there's so much, like that. Elders are, sent off to, go away, like in that's decades of stuff that has established that, and way more than we can unpack in just this moment. But then youth voices are also not valued, and so we do bring that in, and it's interesting how then those two are also the ones who are kind of often put at odds in or in just religious spaces in general, not even just religious education, but that it's like that it's the battle of the elders versus the youngins who got a some fresh new idea and they want to ruin everything that the elders fought so hard for. And yeah, that's really such like a cultural thing to think that those two have to be at war with each other and have to be in conflict.
And it's a real disservice to our parents when we get in that position. I mean, you probably both have experience with this. I don't think this, like every colleague I've spoken with has a story where you've got parents who are on committees and in social justice work groups or like covenant circles or whatnot with elders and who consider these elders part of their friend group and are feeling like they're butting up and at odds with the same elders when it comes to what's happening in the kids program and ways that they want to see the kids get more involved in the congregation or stuff like that. And you kind of get this like in between generation that gets trapped in this conflict, which again, I think comes to us from outside into our congregations, into our faith practice families and spaces. And I think covenant is such a strong tool for unraveling that and being more intentional about moving through that.
Again, yeah, like living by covenant means living with the reflection piece of it. And so that's when you get the opportunity to reflect on was there harm, or is this document even still working? Is it addressing our needs as a community? Or right, like have our voices changed, our opinions changed, our ideals changed? And is that reflected, or does it need to be reflected in the document? Yeah, I just I think it's a really key part to the covenanting process.
Oh, and I think that reflection, Michael, is so key in like it really is like I think human existence is always a balance, it might be my slight like Taoist influence. But the human existence is so much about like we are going to always have to navigate these moments to find balance, like that. How can we both make sure that covenant isn't being used to attack others, but how can we make sure that we're also not letting people become so disruptive that our communities are not functional and healthy anymore? And there isn't a perfect one size fits all, but that we got to reflect, we got to be asking the questions, we got to be having the dialogue. Which I suppose will take me into like my last bigger question for us here, which, and I've already mentioned the On Repentance and Repair. If you haven't checked that out 2 years ago as part of the Common Read, I highly recommend that book. But it's really got me thinking about how can living by covenant help us account for this need to repair. Like you were just talking about reflection and like being able to own. You've talked about being able to own when you've done something wrong. So how can living by covenant help us account for the fact that we are human, things are going to get messed up, community is messy, things will be complicated? How can covenant help us account for that need to repair?
I kind of want to highlight, I think that it's not like a value thing. It's also not a document, right? Like I think this is kind of maybe going back to what you're saying, using it as a hammer. It's not like something that is, oh, if you're not doing everything on here, like you're wrong, or like if you're not taking time to reflect on it, then you're doing it wrong, right? It's like it's all like I think you call them growing edges, Jen. It's like that's what like our practice is all about, is like all of these growing edges. And right, seeing that again, like it is a challenge, right? This is what we are striving towards. And so if it's not right, the fact that it's living, if it's not doing what we need it to do, if it's maybe the challenge is a little too hard right now, maybe the things on it are too much to ask and we need to dial it back and keep it like it can still be a document that lets us live together and work through conflicts. But I mean, I guess it kind of depends on on what your covenant looks like and what your group looks like. But also, yeah, I want to say like it's always appropriate if it's like too much of a challenge, I think, to not be afraid to dial back some of the agreements because that might not be what's right for the group.
I think I'm going to go back to sort of okay, so the men in this home are not active in UU world because professional religious educator working in congregations, like it became difficult for my husband to come to the same congregation. That's not where he found right solace and quiet because that's where his wife worked. So there was like you have interesting relationships with congregations when you're the one working there or your spouse is, right? So and then my stepdaughter is sort of my business partner, and she's always been very active in religious education work in congregations as well. So same thing with her husband. So when we were like, when Jersey and I were like, right, if we're all going to live together, we need a covenant. The men folk were like, what? Why? Huh? And Jersey and I both found ourselves naming because there was this moment where the guys were like, but we know how to live together. Like we are family, you know. And Jersey and I found ourselves naming, yes, and creating that covenant is an act of such love and care and intention because everyone's happy now. It's very easy when everyone's happy and there's, our family is blessed with no major crisis here in our home to go, we know how to be together. That will not always be the case. And to do the work of saying, I love this community, this group so much that I want to make sure that we are set up the best we can as we handle all the things that come up in life, right? Together. That I would like to attend to this with an eye to the future. Not the now, not the present, although it helps that too. But the future when we meet bumps in the road that we didn't know we were going to meet, right? And I think that's at its core one of the most magic pieces of covenant. That it is an investment out of deep, deep love and care and intention and commitment. And that's why, as Michael's talking about this revisiting and this keeping it alive, that's why it's so crucial too, because our love is also not static, right? Our investment in each other cannot just be static. Like these are relationships. They ebb, they flow, they grow, they stretch. It's this living, breathing community. And so our covenant lives and breathes along with us and moves along with us. And it's magic stuff and it's hard and it's challenging. And Michael, you're absolutely right. Like sometimes you can sit around and put down all this really, really magic aspirational stuff and then realize that nobody has the spoons for this really, really aspirational magic stuff right now, and you have to go, okay, time out, time out, time out. And I encourage anyone who hasn't done it to sit in a room with youth making a covenant for like their lock-in or, a specific project. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, this is how we'll spend our church here together, but, for an event, because it's some amazing stuff. And sometimes what appears on that covenant, like which swear words are acceptable to say, might seem strange to you. I had a group of youth literally spend 45 minutes debating which swear words they were comfortable with without saying any of them. It was fascinating to watch. Not an adult said a word. We just watched this conversation unfold. And then at the next lock-in, they thought they could breeze through that conversation, but we had a new person who didn't like, and it was one of the adults who was like, actually, I'm really not comfortable with that word. And to watch the kids go, oh yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, no, like that's okay. That's fine. We will adapt. It's silly. It's arguably inappropriate in some people's eyes. And yet it was this beautiful moment of seeing that living covenant happen in action and come from this place of intentional care and love and adapting for people's needs. It was magic. It was really cool. So if you get the chance, go check out How the Youth Covenant, because if you have been feeling it's a difficult process, or it's a stale process, or you've been struggling with it in your adult groups, seeing it from that very different perspective, from a very different sort of culture, is really, really cool and inspiring.
This thinking about just the magic of the work of Covenant and revisiting it, both of these have me thinking about, I worked with a congregation in a not specifically religious education setting, and one of the most beautiful things that I got to do was to preach and talk about Covenant when things were going well, and have them understand why it was important to be working on the stuff around right relationship, to be having these conversations about how the covenant works, and what if someone causes harm, how could they be allowed back in, so that they have it figured out then and not when something has gone horribly wrong. And there was it's on our leader lab, and I'm going to share it in our chat with the participants, and I will also put it in our show notes as well, so be sure to check for it there. But there's this great reflections on right relationship that I ended up preaching on, and ask great questions like, what intentions are we assuming with the other, and what impact are we having no matter our intentions, and later on, can I let go of my need to control the situation, and am I willing not to have to be right? Some big tough questions, and these were quite fun to preach on. And but like, I think that, yeah, if we are living in that covenant and having real practice, then yeah, it sets us up for success, that when something is going wrong, or someone has been hurt, that there are clear processes for addressing it, instead of constantly having to be reactive. I think that in my mind, that's one of the bigger dangers that so many communities, especially, I say this as a chronically online person myself, even if I am now a digital minimalist, I can still admit that I'm chronically online. And but that so many of our communities are so reactive, and we're constantly reacting to things. And Covenant allows us, I am also, some level of neurodivergent that really enjoys planning, so I do like that part of Covenant. So I do like the plan, but it also allows us to have an idea ahead of time what's going to happen, instead of, oh, well, this horrible thing happened, now we have to suddenly decide while it's going on, and we're all very emotional. And if instead you have clear protocols, like, hey, someone's been hurt, we're going to ask this person to step away for a little bit, but then we have an idea of, like, this is how they can come back to a correct relationship with this community. That's such a gift to that future group. Like, to have established that ahead of things going wrong is such a gift for the future. And so in a sense is a gift to our young people.
Oh, upvote. As someone who recently had to do a reactive right relations process, upvote that. Do it before, 100%. When things are good.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right. When in my mind, having done organizing work, I think a lot of, maybe not all of the mainstream political organizing, but a lot of the folks that really do care about building healthy, long-term, sustainable communities, this is the shift towards it. I mean, I'm sure you may be seeing some of it in, like, the conversations about education, which then loops me back to your conversation about praxis. Suddenly also, popped up in my mind, and like that idea that, like, we have our thing, then it gets tested, and maybe it works, maybe it didn't. So then we have our chance to reflect. And if that process somehow went horribly, then we can now be like, okay, that didn't actually work as good as we thought it did. So then we can just constantly be cycling through this to have this living covenant.
And that is faith formation, right? Like, that process, I think we get really hung up. This is where, like, perfectionism is a plague, right? We get really hung up sometimes on, like, oh, if the covenant's not working, the covenant must be broken. And it's like, no. That means we've learned something. That means we've learned a thing. That means we can change how we're going to approach this. That means we can care for each other better. Conflict is faith formation. And learning when, you've put forth your best effort, you've all planned a thing, and like, oh, these were too aspirational. We need to lower these, or we need to adjust these, like Michael was talking about. Like, that's faith formation, team. Like, all of these moments that help us figure out how to be together as our highest and best selves, whatever that looks like. That's faith formation. It's magic.
Takes me back to that idea of the covenant as the lighthouse, right? It's like the beacon for when we're in loving community, what does it look like? Right? That's our beacon, that's our goal that we're trying to get to. And sometimes, like, on the other high side of that, we want to feel successful as humans, right? Like, we also can't have a covenant that's so aspirational that, like, oh man, every day that we're in this community, like, I feel so bad because we're not getting any closer, right? There has to be that piece of like, okay, but today, like, I was able to not harsh someone's mellows, let's say, or like, I don't know, like today we just had fun. Like, that's a classic youth covenant edition. Have fun. 2 U's usually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
You have to have 2 U's anywhere you can put 2 U's. Absolutely.
I want to call back to that previous episode of the podcast. I am all on board for 2U's everywhere. Maybe not URLs, but
Yeah.
Right. Well, and we can even make it covenant, like add some extra. Can add a few extra U's to covenant here. As much as I would love to literally converse for, I'm pretty sure I could talk with the two of you about this topic for probably a whole nother hour. I also believe that, I'm going to keep the covenant to myself of my own expectation that this podcast isn't one of those ones that's like a 3-hour podcast that we're asking people to listen to. So that is my covenant with you, listeners. We're going to stay under 3 hours, okay? And, but as a final parting shorter question, I'd like if you could share, and maybe it's a word, maybe it's a few sentences. What is something that just really brings joy to your heart in thinking about covenant?
Go one word. I'm thinking love right now because Jen's mentioned it a couple times, but I think that's like core, right? Like, this agreement is because we love each other and because we want to be better at loving each other or being in loving community. That's a lot of words, but love is the
love is the main word there.
Yeah.
I learned from a colleague this way to write a covenant with a group. It's like a shortcut to a quick and dirty covenant, right? For a workshop maybe, but it was to fill in these blanks. And the phrase is, because we value blank, we promise to blank. And I tell you what, I think about that all the time with covenanting, because again, it comes back to that love piece. It's that rooting our promises in what we value as our community. And that fills my heart with joy. And I've always remembered that line as just something precious that really sort of quickly cuts to the core of what we want in this covenant, right? What you put there.
Those are some beautiful, beautiful notes to end on. In that activity, actually, it made me think of I feel like there's a Deeper Joy Covenant activity in like the Covenant Lighthouse section that might be kind of similar to that one, or at the very least, it like triggered in my brain that was like, wait, I don't feel like I remember reading something.
That could be where it came from.
Right?
I can't trace this now in my mind.
Constantly, just a big loop of UU happenings. Everyone's sharing their ideas with each other. So if you do want to check out some of the Covenant Lighthouse activities, they are on the Deeper Joy webpage. You just can click on the lighthouse itself and it'll pull up some of those activities. And if you want any other additional conversation about covenant, we did recently have a threshold conversation that happened recently. As of recording, the link is not up, but I believe it should be up by publication. So hopefully that link for that will be in the description. You can find us both on podcast streaming platforms as well as YouTube. And so make sure to give us a subscribe, a 5-star review, the best review for this amazing covenant session. And we appreciate and value you who take time to make it all the way to these ending moments, especially. And if you have made it all the way to this ending and Unitarian Universalism is new to you, make sure to head to uua.org to learn a bit more about Unitarian Universalism. And a deep breath here as we close out. This was our second JUUst Breathe episode of our 5th season, with many more to come. We're so excited for this exploration of whole church religious education with the community building map of deeper joy. And on our next episode, we're going to be landing on opening up beach to explore how we can engage community building with vulnerability. Be sure to like and subscribe and spread the word about your favorite UU podcast.
Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery.